however, a crime scene. So that left me blank. And as a parent, you don't expect to be burying your children. I had to wait some of them. If I can backtrack, my daughter met a violent death. We're all adults here. My daughter was beaten, she was raped, she was strangled, and she was set on fire. They had to use a cherry picker to take her out of the bedroom because she was attached to the bed. We never had a chance to say cheerio, nothing. Things seemed to hit a stalemate. I had to wait somewhere in the region of 26 months before the coroner's inquest in Bolton. I had a police inquiry into my daughter's death. The police had into the police inquiry about my daughter's death. Salford Council had an inquiry into my daughter's death. So there was more people knew about what happened to my daughter than I did. 26 months later, I was asked to go to Bolton Coroners for a pre-coroner's inquiry. And when I went there was a barrister, there were detective superintendents, detective chief constables, and I looked round and I thought, my God, am I up against these? These are professional people. And I believed the Greater Manchester had made an absolute arse of my daughter's case. So I had to find out what domestic violence was. I'm not particularly clever. I'm not well educated. I got my 3 R's, reading, writing and rubbing out. Please don't laugh, I had to resit the rubbing out. But I had to go to and I didn't want to be belittled. So I trawled the internet, and you don't have to trawl long before it spews at you the amount it was done. And to my shock and horror, in the 2 years, 2008 to 2010, when my daughter was killed, there was 16 women and girls in Greater Manchester alone met a savage end. Now, for every girl or man, and there are men that suffer from domestic violence, for every one of us, for every one of them, there was 2 parents, as the lady from, was it 98, could tell you, 96 will tell me. And when we got there, I couldn't understand what went wrong. There are people in place, clever people who are being paid a lot of money and given a lot of time to help people that was in my daughter's situation. And my daughter fell through the net without touching the sides to end up with a Roth of Appleton. So on the way through, I asked the coroner, and I was pretty disappointed at the end with Mrs. Leeming. I thought she'd let Greater Manchester Police off quite lightly. But she did allow me enough rope to hang myself, and I asked the simple question, was what was in place in Greater Manchester when my daughter and these girls died good enough? And as they're on oath, the answer was no. Now, I don't know how much my daughter's death has cost the taxpayer, but there was a total clear out in Greater Manchester. And the police that were on active duty in domestic violence, because it transpired that they just weren't good enough. Now, I don't know if it was the nature of my daughter's death, the timing of my daughter's death, or the publicity that my daughter's death got. But it ended up, when I came out at the coroner's inquest, I was annoyed with Mrs. Leeming, who turned out to be a star turn. This was a clever lady. You wouldn't this was a lady who was clued up. I came out of the corridors and I was met by 3 members of the press. One from the BBC, one from ITV, and a fellow stood at the back. And they wanted to ask how mad I was with Greater Manchester Police. Well, at that time, I was so incensed, I didn't want to raise that. But I did give an interview to the young fellow who was stood there, and he introduced himself as Keith 103 Radio. Now, before I knew it, as a young lady on the phone to me said, Mr. Brown, we don't think you got a good deal or your daughter got a good deal. Can we take up your story? And I said, most certainly. I would have trumpeted it from the highest hill. I wanted to know. I wanted people to know what happened to my daughter, how it happened, and how she'd been badly let down. And before I knew it, this young lady appeared into my life. Now, without her, I would have still been a voice in the wilderness. But all the way through, and you ladies here could possibly understand it, in the media, there is women everywhere, and I met with nothing but encouragement and urge to go on. It started with Mrs. Leaming, the coroner from Bolton, Michelle herself, the MP for Salford, the Home Secretary, and I've even been to Scotland to see Nicola Sturgeon. And all these women were all saying the same song as I have. And I can't believe, I was into this very, had it not been for my daughter, I wouldn't have been here. And I'm not a celebrity, I never wanted to be celebrity. I once had the temerity to Google myself, and it said, please expand your parameters. It didn't know me from Adam. And I would like one day to be able to go back to being the man from nowhere. But for everyone that was killed, there is 2 people like me, parents who grieve, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunties. It knocks at your door and creates havoc. There was a tune, coulda, woulda, shoulda, and that went through my head, and it still does. It's not just Christmas, it's just not a birthday card. It's not a Father's Day card. There are things that pop into your head, and your daughter is still living with me. But I know that I buried her. Well, that was my story. As I say, it moved on from there. It was like a snowball. We went from obscurity to the Houses of Parliament to 10 Downing Street, and most of it was organised by this young lady, to whom I'll be eternally grateful. But I'll take it from here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
I think women getting a rotten deal in this country. I sat and watched the committee last night on violence towards women, and they held up Canada as the best country to be in if you were a woman because of their law. And they took the British Select Committee's 1976 agenda as their blueprint. But we didn't take it. 1976, we're not talking today nor yesterday, we're talking 1976, and since then, very little has been done.
Anyone starting a new relationship should be able to find out whether their partner has a violent past. It's the idea behind Clare's Law, following the death of Clare Wood, murdered by an abusive ex-boyfriend she met on Facebook. It was only after her death that George Appleton's history of violence, abuse and kidnapping at knife point was disclosed. Now the former Home Office Minister Hazel Blears is mounting a campaign to try to stop it happening again by allowing police to warn people about their new partner's criminal history. The Home Secretary Theresa May is said to be considering the idea, although others are advising caution.
I would not want to see information on demand at the police station, which, as I have already said, could be open to misuse. I think go ahead, but go ahead with caution, and let's get the detail right before implementation.
The Victims Commissioner, Louise Casey, and the Association of Chief Police Officers are both backing the proposed new law. Earlier I spoke to Clare Wood's father, Michael Brown. He's playing a big part in the campaign. Michael Brown, what happened to your daughter was absolutely awful. Do you feel that there is something simple that could really be done to remedy it?
Well, I've been advocating and taking along Mrs. Leeming, the coroner for Bolton, who should, between ourselves, come up with a suggestion that ladies in domestic violence situations should be given the right to see if the partner that they have has a past history.
So this wouldn't be just a question of a woman checking up on her new partner at random. This would be as a result of beginning to suffer domestic violence.
Most certainly.
Did you know that Clare was suffering in this way?
I knew Clare was being hassled, and I asked her to come home.
And how long a period was it that you knew that?
When she asked me over I asked her over at Christmas, and that was possibly 6 or 7 weeks before my daughter met her death.
So that if in that time she'd been able to go to the police and say, please tell me, is this man a recidivist? Is he somebody who's done this before? Her life could have been saved.
Most certainly. There are predatory males out there, bless them. They're few and far between, but although today I learned there is a list of about 25,000.
So it would be managed rather like the sex offenders?
Most certainly. Yeah. I've never had to phone for Sarah's Law. It hasn't affected me, and until such time as it does affect you, I see no reason why that information shouldn't be passed on so you can make an educated assessment of your predicament and will I stay or will I go.
And how confident are you that Clare's Law will become law?
I've just come from the Houses of Parliament and I was cheered immensely. I've been touched by the amount of people out with your studio who are full of kindness, who are full of aspirations and willing to help me along the path that I've sadly found myself on.
Michael Brown, thank you so much for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
When Clare Wood's ex-boyfriend became threatening, she told the police. They didn't tell her he had a history of violence against women. She wasn't told he'd even served time for holding another ex-partner at knife point. In February 2009, George Appleton strangled Clare Wood and then hanged himself.
These are photographs.
Since then, Clare's father has fought for the law to be changed, convinced his daughter would still be alive if she'd been made aware of Appleton's past.
My daughter, for as much as she made a fatal mistake, was not stupid, and no, had she known, I believe she would have been out there so fast you wouldn't have seen her for dust.
Under the new right to ask...
My daughter died because some man, and I say man in brackets, couldn't understand no. And the police are telling me that it's going to be 35 days. It's on the internet that it's going to take 35 days for a reply. 35 days. 5 weeks that some woman is going to be tortured, battered, killed. 5 weeks. Well, Clare was everything you'd expect in a child or a daughter. She was a free spirit. She was a canny lass. She had a wicked sense of humour. She said she'd met this lad. I thought, fine, she sounded happy enough. They appeared out of nowhere at my house in Batley, and my son said, what did you make of George Appleton? I said, I didn't like him at all. And he says, well, I've told Clare not to bring her back. Apparently, she caught on to the fact that he was still seeing or still texting with other girls. So She says, that's enough, and gave him his marching orders. She came up and said George Appleton was making a nuisance of himself. So I phoned my ex-son-in-law. I said, will you go in past Clare and tell her to pull her finger out? And I sent him into Bedlam. And the front door was open, there was smoke damage. And it turned out, well documented, that my daughter had been beaten, raped, strangled, and he'd set her on fire. They'd use a cherry picker to take the windows out and lift her out through the upstairs windows. But the police found George Appleton's body 4 days after he killed Clare. He'd hung himself in a disused pub in Salford. Had I known he was contemplating that, I'd have gone and swung on his legs. Could I have done more? Should I have done more? And would I have done more? And I would have done if I'd been party to the information I got after she died. I asked several police, was what was in place when Clare died, was it fit for purpose? And the answer was no. Why my daughter couldn't have been told. I'm in a prison service, I can go on a computer, I can find out how many times these lads have been in prison, what they've been in prison for. I know if I could be in danger. For a policeman to be able to know that at the drop of a hat and not being able to tell my daughter, I thought was sinful. Unbeknown to me, she'd been to the police 2 or 3 times. I mean, you find all these things out after the fact. But no, she didn't confide that in me. It was one of the, being a nuisance, was attempted rape. I found out that he had 3 or 4 non-molestation orders on other women. I found out that he'd done 6 years in the Nick for going up to Newcastle, breaking into some woman's house, an ex-partner, and holding her at knife point for 6 hours. I couldn't say no, realising that there was another lassie, 2 girls a week, going to face what my daughter went through. And I couldn't leave it alone, I couldn't. Clare's law states that you can inquire, or the powers that be can tell you. So why didn't the powers that be tell Rosie Derbyshire, you're in trouble? This lad's trouble. Somebody wants to stand up somewhere and demand to know. Why 5 weeks? ANPR. If you're done for domestic violence, you stay on the register. Police called to a house, and your name's on that list. Out. But I must admit, I got fed up of hearing police standing on the front of the TV saying, we're awfully sorry, but we'll do better next time, and we've learned lessons from this, and they didn't. Greater Manchester Police, here to protect you. Well, they didn't for my kid.
When Clare Wood's ex-boyfriend became threatening, she told the police. They didn't tell her he had a history of violence against women. She wasn't told he'd even served time for holding another ex-partner at knife point. In February 2009, George Appleton strangled Clare Wood and then hanged himself.
These are photographs.
Since then, Clare's father has fought for the law to be changed, convinced his daughter would still be alive if she'd been made aware of Appleton's past.
My daughter, for as much as she made a fatal mistake, was not stupid, and no, had she known, I believe she would have been out there so fast you wouldn't have seen her for dust.
Under the new right to ask, a request for information can be made by the person at risk or a concerned relative or friend. Clare's law also gives a right to know, meaning police can disclose someone's abusive past to a potential victim even without a request from anyone. Both convictions for violent offences and unproven allegations can be revealed if the authorities decide that could prevent a crime. However, some campaigners fear implementing Clare's law will use up scarce police resources.
What makes a woman safe is a strong police response. And I'm afraid we need to get back to basics. Clare's Law, in my view, is more about show than it is about effectiveness.
For Clare's father, though, if just one life is saved, he'll consider it worthwhile. Clare's Law will come into effect next March. Catherine Jones, 5.
I am the face of Clare's Law. I was never a long-distance runner. Clare's Law came in as a trial in 2014 and we're still waiting, 6 years later, for it to pass the third reading in Parliament. 3 of the articles was on domestic violence, and they were all subject to community orders. A community order is no punishment whatsoever. An non-molestation order is nothing. And I rely on people like yourselves to bring this to the fore, to bring the powers to be, to heal, and say this is just not good enough. It isn't good enough. You know it, I know it. And if we are going to be taking the female population of the UK for granted and not give them the care and protection that they need, I think it's a national disgrace. I lost my daughter. I still miss my daughter. It's something they'll never take away from me. But as it is, I'm now 77 and I don't have to carry that long. The domestic violence pandemic has been there long before I appeared. And as I said, there was lots of people doing lots of good work. But if you looked at your hand and spread your fingers, they were all pulling in a different direction. And I think it's about time the government funded an office in the government to deal with domestic violence and not pass the buck from one thing to another, and have it done immediately. I went to see the police in Preston over Rosie Derbyshire, who applied under Clare's Law to be taught what her partner was. And she was killed 10 days later before she even was told that the lad she was going with had just been released from prison on bail for grievous bodily harm. I went and asked why it's not immediate. Why can't you just pick up a paper or pick up a computer and be able to tell him, hey, you're in trouble. Get out of there, or get him out of there. But under Clare's Law and the new domestic violence bill, it's been brought in that care and control of money, being hounded, being followed, being beaten, they've taken into account a lot more than I started out